Hey, everybody, it's Ryan. Thanks for downloading today's show. And just a reminder, as always, Wake Up War Chant is brought to you by our friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central and Township, in the heart of College Town. Ladies and gentlemen, from Tallahassee to Thomasville and from coast to Atlantic coast, it's time to Wake Up War Chant here on 97.9 ESPN Radio, and it's a very happy Monday morning, November the 20th, to you and yours. You're currently listening to the voice of Ryan Kelly. I am the director of digital media at warchant.com. Drew Hickens on the other side of the glass, as he always is, making sure things are working right, getting everything good. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm all right. So, light at the end of the tunnel. Home stretch time. 2 games left in this season. 2 games left to try to get yourself back to a bowl game. So, well, it's really here. It's hard to believe. This has been, and I'm sure it's probably just because of the way things have noticed and gone, an incredibly long football season. And to know that it's almost at the end is fascinating. For some, it's really disappointing. For some, I'm sure it's a relief. But regardless, it's 2 weeks left to make sure that you can go to a bowl game. And, of course, we'll be here with you every step of the way between the Florida game and the ULM game. But first of all, thanks so much for waking up with us here, 6 a.m. on 97.9 ESPN Radio, or streaming over your mobile device or ESPNTallahassee.com. Of course, there's the podcast, iTunes, Podcast Republic, warchantradio.com, all those different places you can find it. And other ways to talk back to us, radio@warchant.com. At Wake Up War Chant is that Twitter account. And finally, our friends at For the Table always have you covered. Madison Social, Central Township, and the So-Do Banking Company, all here, locally owned businesses in our lovely capital city of Tallahassee, Florida. So, 77-6, there's only so much you can say about it. I think there are a couple definitives that you can take away. First of all, I think Ira Scheffel summed it up best in that here you sit almost 3 months later, and it was good to finally give James Blackman a game where he can have a tune-up, where he could – this was the game that ULM was supposed to be all those weeks ago until the hurricane ended up, no pun intended, washing that opportunity away. He was supposed to be able to have a game where he could ease in, get comfortable, work on a few things situationally, and he did it. He was 11 of 15. He was 179 yards, 3 touches, no picks, and a passer rating of 239.6. He looked sharp. He completed the throws he needed to because that's what you're supposed to do in a game like this. He was able to get in his time and his situational, get a little bit of rest, not have to spend a whole game on your back the way he's had to a couple times this season, and get him a little bit of rest before you play a Florida game that's going to mean a whole lot to this season.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. He spent more time on his back in this game than I thought he would. I mean, he was still getting drilled on at least 3 out of 4 of his dropbacks. It was kind of crazy to me because I'm going to be honest with you. It was, again, Saturday was fun. It was nice to see. I'm shocked we put up 77 points. Obviously, the defense and the special teams helped a lot with that. Gave us a lot of short fields, also scored those 2 touchdowns. Delaware State, this may sound crazy, but I really feel this way. I think Delaware State really could be given – they would play good, solid, close games with some of the elite high school teams. That's how bad that team was.
Yeah, it wasn't good, and we actually, I believe we got an email about that. We got an email or a tweet. We got one of those saying, I think you guys overestimated Delaware State. And here's the thing. When you've seen the way that Florida State's looked for every now and then, you forget how much that gap between a not-so-great FBS team and a really bad FCS team can be. And you saw it in a big, bad way. I mean, Delaware State's one of the worst teams in the MEAC. That was their last game of the season. They got a vacation out of Delaware to come to sunny Florida to get their teeth kicked in, 77-6. And, yeah, it was every bit the beatdown that you thought it was going to be. A backup quarterback in Jack McDaniels goes up against pretty much Florida State's second-string defense. He goes 6 of 14, 79 yards, and a pick. Oh, yeah. And he had a passer rating of 76. Your starter, by the way, 7 of 18, 98 yards, 1 interception. passer rating of 73.5. It was not great by any stretch of the imagination for the Delaware State Hornets. They end up with a total of 15 yards rushing, and that's partially because one of your quarterbacks ends up taking 20 yards worth of sacks. Receiving-wise, 177 yards. I mean, this team was bad. Really, really bad. There's no way to sugarcoat that. Florida State did not play a quote-unquote good tune-up game. They didn't play a game against a decent FBS squad that's outside the Power 5. They didn't play a good FCS team. But the thing is, Florida State didn't need to. The way that this season has gone, this was the exact opponent that Florida State needed to play. They didn't need to survive a scare from a North Dakota State caliber team. They didn't even need ULM, who, yeah, by the way, depending on what happens with them next week, might also be looking for bowl eligibility against Florida State in 2 weeks. That's worth noting, and that's a storyline you're going to want to keep your eye on, first of all. This was the exact game that Florida State needed to play. An opponent that was going to get beat start to finish that probably would have been better suited playing Godby on Friday night.
Yeah, I hate to nitpick here, but it was just mind-blowing to me, too, that Delaware State went down the field on 2 straight drives to open the game. And again, we won 77-6. I'm not sitting here being a negative Nancy, but it's like, come on. I mean, the bust, it's still there. It's going to happen. It's going to happen against a terrible Florida team. If Delaware State can do it again, I'm nitpicking here. It was a good game. I enjoyed it. I'm not trying to be a negative Nancy. But now I'm just kind of trying to equate that to how that Florida team looks against a decent UAB team. I mean, listen, UAB, I think we all kind of overestimated a little bit how good they might have been and this and that. I went back and looked at some of their games. I mean, like Ball State hung 51 on them. They lost to Charlotte in overtime. I mean, they're no good, but they're not a terrible football team, and Florida really kind of dominated them start to finish. It really, as far as the Florida game goes, Florida State should win, and by how handily, it'll probably be a close-fought game. Florida State should win the football game. They're the better team, but it's really just it's a matter of what Florida State team is going to show up on Saturday. Is it going to be big game Florida State that shows up and cares and plays with fire and passion just because it's Florida? Or are they going to be a little, I don't really care too much about it because Florida's 4-6 and this and that? Hard for me to imagine the second scenario because it never really matters what Florida's record is, especially when you guys have all talked about how you're fighting for that bowl eligibility and you don't want to be the team that ends that. This is a big game really for both schools, especially with Florida trying to gain some momentum going into hiring their next football coach and this and that. It's big for recruiting. You even heard kids with Miami, even though Miami is where they're at right now, you heard kids after the Miami-Florida State game, even though that game came down to the wire and Florida State wasn't perceived as a very good football team, just Miami being able to pull that game out for a lot of people, a lot of recruits say, oh, look, Miami's back. This shows that they're back and competing. They were able to finally beat Florida State. The same kind of thing could happen if Florida is able to beat Florida State on Saturday. Like I said, Florida State should win this football game. I saw they opened as 5-point favorites. That's probably a little high. The over-under should be about 6. Not really, but, it should be low. And it's going to be really interesting to see how Blackman does against that defense. Florida's run defense has been rough all year, but they kind of hunkered down a little bit against UAB. But again, it's just UAB. I'm not going to overreact. So I'm really interested to see how that game's going to go.
I'm fascinated by it, and I know we'll have plenty of time to talk about it a little bit later on and stuff like that. But when you look at Florida State and Delaware State right now, I think the other thing that you definitively learn from this game is the coaches, I think, need to own up to something very, very, I guess, a little off the beaten path. And again, you completely out-athleted, out-physicaled, out-everything Delaware State start to finish just by showing up. But that doesn't change the fact that literally DJ Matthews averaged 28 yards a punt return. 28 yards. I get it. I get it's Delaware State. I get they're not any good. But you mean to tell me that is what sat on the bench for half a season?
Yeah, not to mention, and with an offense that struggles the way that it does, and the season going the way that it had, if your only excuse for starting T-Mac at punt returner over DJ was that you had a little bit more confidence in him to catch the ball, guess what? Let me break something to all of you that I'm sure you all agree with. If DJ Matthews dropped 1 out of every 10 punts, but would return it, would have an average of 30 yards or 20 yards, 25 yards, as opposed to T-Mac, who just fair catches everything, when you're 4-6, I would take it. Because with an offense that's struggling the way that Florida State does, it's huge. Field position like that is huge. If you can get the ball on your opponent's 40 to start a drive, that's big time for a team like Florida State, who struggles to sustain those super long drives at times, especially with a true freshman quarterback. Any help you could give him, the better. And not even take away the punt return as well. The kid is he's a playmaker. Get him in space. He can make plays. And I know he was injured and this and that, but there's just not a lot of reason to me why he hasn't seen the field more offensively as well. Again, you're 4-6. I just don't get what there is to lose. And I see playmakers. I see athletes. I see guys who make plays in space on an offense who struggles to get anything done. And it kind of baffles your mind a little bit that you haven't seen DJ more.
Yeah, it's... I don't want to say completely inexcusable, but it's completely inexcusable. That's the one thing that when I think you look back at this season, this decision, this, as Gene Williams called it in his Take 5 piece, which you can read on warchant.com, this perfect storm of a season between what's going on here, what's going on in Miami, what's going on at Florida, what's going on with your coaching staff, all of the stuff that's been going on over this year. I don't think there's just so much stuff. I mean, this has literally been almost impossible to navigate in a certain extent between the interior stuff and the exterior stuff, between what happened to your quarterback depth, unfortunately, over the last couple of years, between what's happened with some of your assistant coaches, between what's happened with Miami and the positive momentum that they've built, and the fact that Florida's looking for a new head coach. All that stuff on the outside's whatever. But on the inside, even with the problems with having to play a true freshman, even with the problems of your health at wide receiver, even with the problems of your defense not being up to snuff as you thought it would be at times, the one thing I feel that you could have fixed a lot earlier is your special teams. Because say what you want, after that first game, that Alabama game, when everybody screamed for Jay Graham's head, and honestly they should have, that performance was abysmal. It was terrible. The rest of special teams got shored up. Logan Tyler has looked like the kid that you recruited out of Nixa, Missouri when you recruited him. That kid has a cannon of a leg. He averaged 42 yards a punt, and he had a long of 49.
Yeah, how about that over-under? That over-under on that punt, I think we said it was it 42 or 43 we said
I believe it's 43.
And we were well there. I mean, he was averaging 49, and that fumble happens, and we're trying to throw the ball with about a minute to go. He booms another punt, it gets called back, and then he shanks the one, and I lose it because I was the only one who went over on
43, that's your number, by the way, so you are the big loser in that situation.
Right.
But Ricky Aguayo kicks much better. Logan looks good. Your kickoff returns get shored up after you kind of say, listen, Keith, we can't be having you taking everything all the time. But yet, the punt return situation remained, and that's a problem.
That also reminds me, again, I know Derwin doesn't exactly look smooth back there half the time when he's trying to catch the ball. I don't care. Derwin should be returning kicks on it should be Derwin and whoever. Put DJ back there. Keep Rasul back there. Keep Ryan Green back there. I don't care. But every time Derwin James fields a ball cleanly and has a little bit of space, he's just electric. I mean, you saw him. He explodes when the ball's in his hands. You see what he can do when he has that pick return for 6. You saw every kickoff that he has that gets called back. It seems every time, and you know which. Again, and you were talking about the external, internal issues. That brings me to a little other something that I want to at least bring up, because I don't exactly have a lot of intel on the situation, but it was something that bothered me and that I don't really know a whole lot about. I think I saw something on WarChant about it, so maybe you guys will just have to read it yourselves. And I think Jimbo said something about it. The fact that DeAndre Francois wasn't on the sideline and was doing whatever during the football game. Granted, I don't know what was going on there. Maybe there's a reason, and maybe Jimbo already alluded to it in a press conference. But either way, I just can't see how that's a good look for the guy who's supposed to be the leader of your team.
Well, I think that just goes back to the idea that DeAndre Francois is a guy who, let's face it, had to earn respect last year, not by being the hero in the huddle, not by being the guy who says, hey, let's go out and win this game. He literally had to earn respect by taking a beating. I mean, this is not a guy who came in and immediately commanded the respect of his locker room and immediately commanded the respect of his teammates. And now you've seen it. I mean, earlier in a game this year, he was sitting up in the box. He wasn't on the sideline. You know, he was in Orlando. I think it was Orlando, wasn't it, this weekend? Wasn't that where his Snapchat showed?
He was with Devontae Phillips. That's all I know. Which,
in and of itself, is not a great look. Like, you know, if you're going to be out with the family, that's fine. Maybe not the guy that got thrown off the team.
Yeah, I like I said, I don't want to speculate too much because there might be some factors going on there of why he wasn't there, or maybe he got the go. I can't. It's just weird to me. It's just not a good look. If you're the all I try to think about is if Jameis Winston had ever gotten hurt at Florida State, it would not have mattered who Florida State was playing. There is a 0% chance that he wouldn't be there at that football game. And you know, a lot of people talk about the fact that maybe there's going to be a quarterback battle going into next season. I think Francois will more than likely be the starter, but if I'm on that football team and a guy like Blackman's out there battling his ass off every week for you, a bad team, by the way, and Francois can't even show up when it's no longer a hey, I'm hurt, I'm gonna stay off my leg issue. I'm Snapchatting during the game and whatnot. I start to lose respect for that. I just don't really understand that move. It's just weird.
And that's the thing. If you're not going to be at the game, it's Delaware State. It's not exactly like, because especially to the people who are like, you should be helping along your young quarterback.
Right. Give him some kind of a break.
If your young quarterback can't get through Delaware State, he shouldn't be at Florida State.
But don't be Snapchatting.
But don't do that.
I mean, come on.
You have to know. Here's the thing. We're both dudes in our 20s. DeAndre Francois is a dude in his 20s. There's not that big of an age difference. You have to know, especially if you just host an hour of radio like we do. You have to know what optics look like. Like, you and I know that there are certain things that we can't tweet. And there are certain things you can't put on Instagram. And there's certain things you can't say when you're in the public eye. We didn't have to have a sports info staff or anything like that tell us that. But here's the thing. They have a staff like that. They have a staff. And I'm not trying to pin that on the staff. I'm just trying to say that I know that they're told to watch what you tweet and watch what you say and watch what you do. And the fact that he would still go out and do that, yeah, that's a problem. I think that's a real problem. Because if you're not going to be there, whatever. Just don't advertise it to the world. Because it doesn't matter if you were there to go see your parents or you were out of town to go see a family member or whatever. The minute you send that out on Snapchat during the game and advertise you're not there, it's an issue. But enough about the negative PR. Let's talk about some feel-good stories for this weekend. We touched on them a little bit in our post-game podcast over the weekend. But first of all, Justin Motlow gets his touchdown. The first Seminole to actually score a touchdown for the Florida State Seminoles. That's a cool story. Of course, Florida State AD Stan Wilcox ended up giving his game ball away to the Seminole Tribe of Florida. That's a really neat story. And also another big day for Ryan Green, who, through better or for worse for his career or for what you think about his situation, should he have stayed, should he have went, racks up 96 yards, has a 50-yard take it to the house, 13.7 yards a carry, 2 touchdowns. A cool day for a guy who's waited his turn. And even if it finally came on senior day against a team that he should have done it against, he finally got it. So you can't help but feel happy for that guy. We got to take a break, but when we come back, it's our own Mr. Gene Williams with Jimbo Fisher, the head coach of your Florida State Seminoles. Right after this, hang on. It's Wake Up War Chant on 97.9 ESPN Radio.
back to Wake Up War Chant. We're here on 97.9 ESPN Radio, and once a week we get to talk to Florida State head coach Jimbo Fisher, coming off of that 77-6 victory. Coach, you're only 3 points off the all-time record, which you were here when that happened, and that was against Idaho in 2013. So a lot of points. Made the scoreboard keeper pretty busy on Saturday. So, but let me go into this. Let me ask you a little bit about when you're playing a team you're pretty overmatched against, and you've obviously have decided advantage. What can you learn about your team in those kind of instances?
Sure. Can they play a full game? Can they compete a full game? Can they understand the responsibility that they have? And also, you get guys that can they play well early, get out of the blocks, practice them well, get used to doing that, and then the other guys coming in and player development. I mean, you get your players developed, and you can see can young guys come into a game if you had to, spur of the moment, whether it's not as much pressure, but still coming off the bench. Can they play? Can they play consistent? Can they keep momentum going? Tons of things like that.
Now, I asked you about this a little bit in the press conference, but again, the fact that you guys have had such a weird schedule and you've had the close game after close game, and it's gone a long way. The fact that you were able to get some of those veterans a little bit of time to kind of chill out in the second half. I mean, you've got 2 tough games coming up. How much can that help you down the road?
It can be. I mean, just rest on the body and recovery, and you'll see it in practice this week, and hopefully in the weekend this weekend, and then hopefully back at ULM the next week. But those games are very necessary because people don't understand the grind that these kids go through, and not playing those games is not. You need to play those games.
And then also gives you an opportunity to get an extended look at some of the young guys. And we saw a lot of those young guys in the second half, Coach. Anything jump out at you about some of the guys who usually don't get much playing time?
Yeah, you see DJ, who's finally understanding what he needs to do and make good decisions. Still let 2 balls hit the ground that he didn't need to let hit the ground. Even though return balls quick, you still see some of the immaturity in that. He needed to hit those. Those 2 balls should have been caught, but he still got a chance to be a heck of a guy. You saw Kane, though. You saw Marvin Wilson. You saw a lot of those guys out there making plays that, they're continuing to grow in Stanford. Samuels made plays. You see Hampshire. You saw Fagan. I mean, all those types of guys that, out there, and it's great to see those guys play.
And how much was this helpful in the development of James Blackman at quarterback, Coach?
Well, we'll see. I mean, hopefully it is that he can go out there and make decisions and make big plays when he had to make them, and we'll see. But, I mean, those things are critical, especially after some tough outings that he's had as far as competitive. Like I say, it's been tough, but things I've been very proud of him. I think he did some tremendous things. And sometimes more is put on him than he has to, but sometimes when you're in a quarterback against great teams and you have to throw the football to win, that's what happens. And you wish you could have had these games in the beginning of the year, not the end of the year, but at the same time, it still can be very beneficial.
Now, a fun thing for me, Coach, and I think a lot of the fans was at the end of that game seeing Justin Motlow get that touchdown. Here's the first member of the Seminole tribe to ever suit up for the Garnet Gold, and for him on senior day to have that. Just how special was that for you as a coach to see that young man be able to do what he did?
For all of us. I mean, he is you talk about a guy who busts his tail and practiced every day and gives you everything he's got. And there was a time we felt very comfortable putting him in a game no matter what the situation was. We had some guys hurt there. We were going to play him. He felt he is a good player, has good ability, and it's great to see him get rewarded out there like that.
Now, I know it's been obviously a tough season for you, not what you expected. You've had to go through a lot. But does something like that, does that kind of remind you why you're in coaching when you see just that your teammates jumped around? We saw him after the game. He was just glowing how excited he was, Coach.
It does, but even the tough times remind you why you're in coaching. That's why you're in coaching. The tough, the good, the easy, the bad, but also, like you say, the player development of kids, it's all about the kids. Everything in coaching is about the kids, so you got to remember that.
Now, one thing, Coach, a little scuttlebutt online, as there always is, but didn't see DeAndre Francois on the sideline. What's going on with him on Saturday?
Nothing.
Okay.
Nothing.
Was he at the game, or was he?
They don't have to be on the side. There's other games he hasn't been on the sideline.
Okay. All right, Coach. And then the other one,
you're not required to be on the sideline.
Gotcha. And didn't see Laybourne either, and I guess it's just because he's redshirting, Coach.
Yeah, he's going to be redshirting. So some guys they can dress. I mean, to dress and not go out there and play. Some of them guys don't like to do that. You know what I'm saying? It has nothing. You talk about a guy who busts his tail in practice. He's going to be a really good player. We love him.
Now, it's unfortunate to see Brock Rubel helped off the field. I don't know if you have any. It's too early, or what you know about his status, Coach.
I won't. I mean, injury reports like that, we'll wait and see, and And like I say, without injury report because of the leg, we'll probably keep that to ourselves. But he got a little knee, it looks like, and we'll see. We can't tell yet.
Gotcha. And Coach, big game coming up this weekend. Obviously, it's always a big game when you're playing the Florida Gators. And I mean, growing up, I know you were always a Florida State guy, so you know the meaning of this rivalry. What does it also mean to the players, and how big is this game for the whole program?
Oh, they understand it. I mean, it's why one of the reasons you come to Florida State to play in that rivalry. I mean, it's Florida State, one of the best rivalries all in college football. And, they've all grown up with each other, been around each other, played with each other, whether it's Pop Warner, high school, or against each other. I mean, and, that's – to play your rivalry games, they mean something. We've always been very successful with them here, and hopefully we can continue because they got a good team, and going down there is going to be very tough, as we know.
And, Coach, you've had unbelievable success down in Gainesville, winning all three down, last three in a row, which hasn't been done before, going for 4 this year. Why do you think you've had so much success, and which is one of the toughest venues to play at in college football? Our players have taken it serious, and they get down there and they compete well and play well, and it's all about our players. They do a great job, and our assistant coaches do a great job. And, Coach, you got coming up, obviously, the holidays, and it's always been you're in college football, you're in pro football, whatever the case is. It's just Thanksgiving's one of those holidays that gets them. Well, how do you guys try to make that special for the kids so it's just not all business? Well, Wednesday night, everybody will go to the position coach's house and eat a big dinner. And then Thursday, we'll eat a team dinner before we'll practice earlier that day, have a big Thanksgiving dinner, and then get ready and get on the bus and ride to Gainesville. So we'll do a team dinner on Thursday. Each individual segment will do a dinner at their house, at the coach's house the night before. So we try to make it as family-oriented as we possibly can. And last thing I want to ask you about, Coach, is just I don't think I've ever, being here as a student back at when I started in 1985, I don't ever think I've seen this many noon games in one season. But one thing I thought about that might affect you guys is how does that affect recruiting? Because so many of the guys you recruit are not local, and it's hard for them when they're playing games Friday night to get in here on by noon the next day. How much has that impacted you guys this year? It has some, but not a great deal. It hasn't been that big a deal. All right, Coach. Well, I appreciate you joining us, and good luck, and we'll see you down in Gainesville this Saturday. Thanks a lot.
Pop-ups and video ads.
Are you wasting your time again on clickbait FSU updates that are bloated down with ads?
Yeah. And after crashing my computer, the information isn't even up to date. You're on warchant.com. What's really going on with the Seminoles?
For the real scoop, you'll need to get your own Warchant subscription.
What's it cost?
Free. There's a 30-day trial offer right now.
You know I like free. Sign me up.
Use the promo code WARCHANT30. That's WARCHANT30. Nobody has more accurate and timely information on the Noles than WARCHANT.com.
WARCHANT.com, your ultimate Seminole source.
A stat we gave you earlier on in the week on the Warchant Twitter account, we brought it up. It ended up getting brought up on the television broadcast. ESPN Stats and Info found it conveniently later. And it's been all over the internet. It is, for the first time since 1959, Florida and Florida State are both going to play a football game with losing records against each other, which is kind of hard to believe that this series that's just a little over 60 years old, literally you almost have to go back that far to realize both of these teams haven't had a losing record coming into that since then. If you want to know just how much this game has mattered to college football, if you want to know how much these two programs have mattered, especially since the 1990s, nobody's oblivious to that. But, of course, the 60s, the decade of Bill Peterson. Of course, the 90s, the decade of Spurrier and Bowden. 80s, which, of course, Florida State's rise to prominence. The 2000s, Florida's dominance. And now 2010s, Florida State's real dominance throughout that time outside of that 2012 game. One of these teams has literally mattered for the last 40 years. Maybe not always at the same time, quite like the 90s. But the fact that one of these two teams has been somewhere on that national scale in some extent over the last 40 years is pretty remarkable. And that's why I'm fascinated to see a game where neither of these two teams matter. It's kind of like I still think it's going to be intense, and I still think it's going to be competitive, and I think it's going to be a game that's going to look forward to the future. Kind of similar to those mid-2000s Florida State-Miami games, those 07, 08, 09 games, where it seemed like the winner of that was supposed to be the team that was back and trending on the up and up. Of course, it didn't happen for either of those two teams until Jimbo Fisher made it to town in 2010 to become the head coach of the Florida State Seminoles. But I do think this is an important game for the future of both of these programs. Florida's going to have a new coaching staff. Florida State's pretty much going to have a new coaching staff. They're going to keep the head man in charge. But overall, for the direction of this program, and you alluded to it earlier in the first segment, Drew, recruiting momentum, what fans see, the overall confidence level in this program, and for the Florida program, I think a lot of that is on the line on Saturday.
It's just one of those scenarios where granted, Florida is also not very good this year, but if Florida is unable to beat Florida State in what will more than likely be their worst season throughout the next decade, then when are they going to beat them? And again, Florida's also not good, but the fact that they were completely unable to take advantage, basically they were unable to do what Miami did this year, which was snag some momentum back in a state that, to be honest, over the last 3-4 years, Florida State has owned. It hasn't really been close with recruiting or results on the field. So the fact that Florida's been unable to do that is obviously detrimental. They're going through yet another coaching change. And, you know, there's a lot of chatter that it's going to be Chip Kelly, but that's nothing that's official yet. I'm sure players will be excited about that, but it's just, if you're unable to beat Florida State when they've lost 35-3 to Boston College and they lost to Louisville at home, and you know they've just dropped out, and they finally lost to Miami again, and all these games where they've just looked so mediocre. It's kind of demoralizing to a certain extent, especially for recruits, I think, who look and see that as bad of a season as Florida State is still having, Florida still can't beat them. I think that's really the message, is that Jimbo would still own Florida, this and that. Now, granted, again, it's Randy Shannon versus Jimbo. We all know how that battle has typically gone. I do think Florida State, like I said last segment, I do think Florida State wins this football game. It's really, to me, just a matter of how much. But that being said, it's very also possible that Florida State could lose this game. It hasn't been like it's been in years past for Florida State and Florida matchup, and you think to yourself, I just don't think there's any way Florida could pull this off. I'd say it's probably about 60-40, 70-30, or 65-35 Florida State, something like that. If there was a matchup predictor, which I'm sure there is somewhere, I think it would be around that number. Again, I think Florida State's the better team, but I think Florida State's shown you that they've played up and down to competition all year. So like I said, it's really just a matter of whether or not which Florida State team is going to show up. If they show up and play like they did against Clemson, Florida won't score a single point, and Florida State will more than likely win by, 7, 10, 14 points. But I also think Florida's going to come to play here too. I think it's going to be a nasty, low-scoring game. I think Florida State probably wins a tight one. But again, maybe that's just a little bit of optimist in me. I don't know.
Well, there actually is a predictor like that. It's called the spread. And Florida State opens up as a 5-point favorite in this football game. If you're a fan of ESPN's FPI, which is a very flawed statistic, but sometimes can tell us what we need to know, 63.8% probability that Florida State wins this football game. Florida State's never won 4 straight in Gainesville. And the other thing with Florida is I'm not sure completely about this game, and I'm not as confident as you are. I would have been, if you'd have asked me after that Missouri game, I'd have said, yeah, totally. But here's the thing. As Randy Shannon is as a coach, I will give him all the credit in the world that he somehow prevented that team from absolutely quitting. Because by all accounts, 2 weeks ago, that game at South Carolina should have been a disaster for Florida.
Well, also with Missouri too, what you've come to see the last few weeks is that offense is actually pretty potent. Missouri is not a bad football team. Granted, they started off 1-5, but they've rattled off 5 wins in a row, and that run game that they have is for real. And they ran all over Florida, which you thought at the time was just another example of Florida's bad rushing defense. But again, Missouri's kept it going. And with South Carolina, I mean, really it was back and forth, just disaster after disaster for both teams. Throwing a pick, returning it what looks like a pick six, fumbling in the end zone, with Carolina picking it up, throwing a pick on like the next play. I mean, it was just back and forth. Granted, I mean, Carolina should have probably won by 2 scores, but I think really the best thing that happened to Florida, and I know it sounds crazy because they're really both not very good, but that offense is just a little bit more competent with Felipe Franks out there. They're able to get a little bit more done. I think there's more confidence.
Because he can push it down the field.
Yeah. He gives you a chance to hit that big play, which you know Florida State is also susceptible to, and they've been all year. We're good for about a blown coverage a game, whoever it may be. Again, I think I don't see either team scoring a lot of points here unless there's some defensive special team scores.
Here's the thing. In the 4 ACC-SEC rivalries, Florida State-Florida is probably the linchpin of those games because you kind of think those other 3 are going to go chalk. Georgia's going to beat Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech has not beaten Georgia in Atlanta in over a decade. Clemson's going to beat South Carolina. Clemson's the better team. Louisville's got Lamar Jackson. I realize they blew it last year when they shouldn't have, but can Kentucky really win 2 in a row over the reigning Heisman Trophy winner? I just don't have a lot of faith in the Cats, and that kind of means, well, if it goes chalk, if Tech loses, if Kentucky loses, and if South Carolina loses, you're looking at what could be either a 500 split or a decisive victory for the ACC. And I think the ACC would do a lot for their momentum to keep up if Florida State could get that W.
The good news is the game's being played at noon, which Florida State has plenty of experience doing that year.
Absolutely. Well, to be fair, so does Florida.
Right. I really don't think Florida's played nearly as many nooners as Florida State's played this year.
But they've played a good bit.
So we'll see. I think I would rather them be playing at noon, I think, for James Blackman's sake in Gainesville than a night game. That being said, obviously, I'd rather see the game played at night just from a fan perspective. But as far as wins or losses, I think maybe it helps Florida State a little bit. I don't really look into that too much. Again, I know Florida's going to come to play. You're probably going to get the semi-best version of both teams, even though they're not very good. I think it'll be a tight game just because of how not good both teams are. But it's, again, Florida State shows you that ability that's the difference to me between Florida State and Florida this year. Is Florida is kind of a team who, has been plagued by suspensions and injuries, but they've never really shown you that ability to hang with elite teams. Florida State has done that several times this year. Hung with Alabama. Should have beat Miami. Should have beat Clemson. I know the final score doesn't look like that. Should have beat Clemson. Don't care. I don't think Florida obviously only played one elite squad in Georgia, but that game was never close. It was 21-0 by the time I got to my seats. I just don't know if Florida. I can't be confident in them at all just because they haven't shown me anything against a decent team. But that being said, again, for the third time, you really don't know which Florida State team you're going to get. If that defense comes out and just straight up dominates them like they should, I think Florida State will be fine. Now, if you're kind of just taking shots back and forth and you're both blowing plays here and there and Florida's able to move the ball a little bit, it might get a little hairy, but we'll see.
That being said, you take a look over this weekend. Obviously, there's not a whole lot to report. Most of everybody played a cupcake. But the teams that didn't, well, most of them pretty much flirted with disaster. Miami flirted with disaster against Virginia for a good little bit. Wisconsin flirted with disaster for Michigan for some time. Navy Notre Dame was a close squeak out for the Fighting Irish. Kentucky kept it competitive with Georgia for a good little bit. Penn State had to beat Nebraska in an absolute shootout. USC just barely got away from UCLA. And Oklahoma State's the one that ends up getting bit. They lose at home 45-40 to Bill Snyder's Kansas State Wildcats. A pretty interesting weekend any way you slice it and dice it. You can call Oklahoma State the big loser, but I think the biggest loser is there was a team literally just a couple weeks ago that we were talking about. If they win at home against one of the top 4 teams in the country, they're probably going to win their division and be in the college football playoff. And yet this Saturday, NC State goes to Winston-Salem and loses a shocker to Wake Forest, which, by the way, Vegas nailed because Vegas installed the Deacs as a 1.5-point favorite in that game. And instead, NC State's probably going to finish this season, 7-4, 8-4, 7-5, somewhere in that ballpark, and they're going to continue to be what they're always going to be over Dave Dorn, and that's consistently mediocre. And my tune started to change midway through the season on him, but it's fairly clear that NC State is what they are till they aren't.
Sure, and I also think it has a lot to do with the fact that John Wolford is playing some of the best football out of the quarterback position in the country, which is, again, he's done it quietly because he plays for Wake Forest, but if you look at his numbers, I mean, they're ridiculous. And he's doing it against decent teams. It's not like he's just going out there playing scrubs every week. And Wake Forest, I mean, they had 17 tackles for a loss against us. You know they're not a terrible. They're a pretty good defensive club. So it's not shocking to me that Wake Forest won that game. You know, and when Vegas does have something like that where you look at it and you think it's a surefire thing, chances are they know something that we don't. They've really dove into it.
Remember that big spread for Ohio State and Sparty a couple weeks ago that we all scoffed at, and then Ohio State blew the doors off of them? Yeah. Those lines that don't make sense, they usually don't make sense for a reason. It's because Vegas knows something you don't.
That's why betting is so difficult. I would say if you ever feel surefire about one game, you just probably shouldn't even touch it because chances are you're just going to be wrong. I don't think I was so certain, for instance, that Notre Dame was just going to pound Miami, and I couldn't believe that was a 3-point spread. I mean, just not even close. I mean, there's been plenty of games where I just look like an idiot, but you got to eat crow sometimes. That's the way that it is.
Meanwhile, how amazing is it that in a world where NC State's pretty good, Clemson's good, and Florida State are all good, Wake Forest is probably going to end this season 8-4 with a victory over Duke. Dave Clawson is a tremendous football coach. I know I say that a lot on this show, but it bears repeating. And I'll say this, if I'm Wake Forest, I'm looking to get him a contract extension right now. Because here's the thing. If Scott Frost says no to Nebraska, and I am Nebraska, he's the phone call I'm making. He's a developer of talent in a place where Nebraska is not exactly the most talent-rich part of the country, and they want to win. It'll take a year or two, but he will make you win. He's proven that he will do it anywhere. End of discussion. Varied segment. That was a lot of fun. We'll put a bow on it after this. It's Wake Up War Chant, 97.9 ESPN Radio. Wake Up War Chant 97.9 ESPN Radio. Of course, when you wrap it up, when you talk about a week like this is a festive week. People want to spend time with their friends and family. And, of course, folks may be trying to get out of town this week. But before you do, you know you want to hit up the best happy hour in town with our friends at For the Table. Madison Social, Central Allen Township from 4 to 7. 3 different places, one great price and one great deal for the best happy hour in town. Finally, haven't had a chance to talk about it all day, but Florida State victorious over the weekend on the hardwood. Twice, 67-43, Florida State's final score against the Fordham Rams on Friday, and then 90-73 over the Colorado State Rams. They end up winning the first ever Jamaica Classic. And at least defensively, offensively at times they kind of sputtered, didn't always look perfect, but defensively, this looks like the best defense that they've maybe had since the Junkyard Dog consistent tournament days. It's 3 games. You're going to want to see more of it. But through 3 games, you like what you've seen.
Yeah, I do think there are some real issues there. The free throw shooting looks like it's going to be a problem yet again.
I was about to say, well, it must be a year that ends in a number.
Right. And again, like you said, offensively, this team's going to sputter at times. MJ Walker, real bright spot of last night. I mean, the kid can just flat out shoot. I really think he's a guy who needs to be in the starting lineup, but we'll see how long that takes for him to break through there. I think Florida State will be fun to watch. I think they can be a tournament team. Nothing like last year. You're not going to finish top 4 in the ACC in all likelihood, but I still think you can have some fun in this basketball season.
And you can finish in the top half. You can finish in that top 8 or 7. To me, this offense, a lot of the way teams play against you goes completely down to are Trent Forrest and Terrence Mann finally going to trust their jump shot and be more than one dimension on offense. But there's plenty of more time to talk about that later this week. We're out of time. Drew, my thanks to you.
Thank you.
Thanks to you guys for listening. Not Mike and Mike is up next on 97.9 ESPN Radio. Talk to you soon.
War WarChant.com is the ultimate inside source for FSU football and recruiting. And now you can get in on the action for free for an entire month. WarChant.com is offering a risk-free 30-day trial subscription. Get full access to the #1 website covering the Seminoles just by entering the promo code WarChant30. That's WarChant30. Sign up and get in on the world's most active FSU message boards. Receive breaking news, stories from our award-winning staff, plus get exclusive interviews and videos. Just enter the promo code WarChant30. WarChant.com, your ultimate Seminole sports source.